Hello, everyone. We are pleased to have with us Miss Abigail Dean, who is the best-selling author of Girl A. Girl A has been one of the top 2 Sunday Times bestsellers recently. So yeah, thank you for accepting the invitation.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me, George, and hello to all the Romanian readers out there as well.
Great. So let's start with a bit of background info on yourself. Could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm based in London. I work as a lawyer, a little like the main character in Girl A. And I've loved reading and writing since I was a really little kid. So I think, I was sort of like putting together stapled, stories about animals and stuff when I was like 6 or 7 years old. So it's incredible to have a book out there in the world. Because I've just always really loved reading and writing.
Yeah. Great. So, Girl A, like I said, has been one of the top 2 Sunday Times bestsellers. When you set out writing it, did you ever imagine it becoming something like this? Did you have this in mind? Were you writing specifically, like, did you say to yourself, I'm going to write a bestseller book?
No, I really didn't. I think that what's happened with Girl A has kind of gone beyond wildest dreams. So when I sort of set out and started working on it, my only real aim was that I was going to take my writing a bit more seriously for a sort of period of a few months, because it was something that, as I said, I kind of loved as a kid and as a teenager. And then I think kind of when I grew up, I sort of thought, now's the time to get a sensible job. And, being a writer, that's just never going to happen. So I didn't have much confidence at all in my writing or in how Girl A would do, because I was just, I kind of, in a way, had almost given up on that dream. And I think it was only when I was kind of coming up to my 30th birthday that I decided, actually I'm going to take a bit of time to try writing a novel. It's something I've always wanted to do. It used to make me so happy, and I've kind of, why have I abandoned that kind of idea? But my only aim was just to sort of get to the end of a draft. that was basically as far as it went. Like, let's just try to get like the words down and see how it goes. So no, there was never any kind of I don't think I ever sort of had any expectations beyond wanting to do this sort of for myself and to sort of at least give myself a shot at maybe getting published. That was sort of as far as I dare to dream at that stage.
Yeah. We should also mention that this is your debut novel and that it has had an amazing success, and it's going to be also adapted for television, from what I hear. It's in the works. So yeah, I also translated your book. I'm the translator of the book. So it doesn't feel like a debut novel at all. It feels the writing is very confident, I think, and very mature and nuanced.
I guess the only other thing I would say is maybe in a much more literal sense, Lex in Girl A, that the main character is a lawyer, and I think she is somebody who works in a job very much like the job I did in my 20s. So sort of lots of like travel and really long hours. And a few people have said, did your experiences inform Lex? But I think Lex in a way is much better at her job than I ever was, because I found that lifestyle really difficult and challenging, and I found it quite cold, the kind of endless hotels and kind of meeting rooms, and whereas I think that for Lex, she finds sort of great salvation in those places that are so different from her childhood home
a part of the inspiration for Girl A, as I read in another interview you gave, are at least 3 real life cases, right? And you, how did you fit them in the story? And could you tell us a bit about the cases themselves? Because I'm not sure if many people know about them.
Yeah, I think there were 2 cases I'd say kind of in particular. The one being the West case, which was kind of a series of crimes committed in the UK in the 80s and kind of discovered in, I think, the early 90s, where a sort of couple, an older couple, had been abusing their children and also kind of had been involved in the murder of a number of women. And the reason that case, I think, influenced Girl A was a huge amount of attention was paid to the house where the crimes had taken place, to the extent that the house ended up being destroyed. It was a kind of hole in the street, but because it was almost as if the house had kind of come to define the crimes, and it was one of the cases where, you know, it was known as the House of Horrors. So that, I think that was kind of, I was really interested in the house almost being a character in the kind of crimes, and I guess in Girl A, the house on Moorwoods Road in a way is the opposite, in that Lex wants to try to do something good with this house that she has inherited, even, you know, despite what happened there. She wants to kind of to turn it into a force for good, I guess.
Exactly, yeah.
And then I think the other case was the Turpin Case, which is a more recent case from the US, where kind of children were being abused under the guise of religious devotion. And I think, yeah, it was kind of a case where there were lots of sort of pixelated images, and this family became very renowned online, and I think, yeah, the kind of question there was just how do you live in the aftermath of something like that, where you've kind of become so known by a kind of crime. You know, how do you kind of keep on living in the years and months that follow that? It just feels like that idea of and I think it's something that I struggle with myself in terms of being a consumer of true crime as well. That people do get really involved in these cases and sort of almost like fixated on them, and I don't know if that is ever healthy, or if it's kind of helpful to the survivors of these crimes. It's kind of a question I think I wrestle with and don't know the answer to, you know, in terms of my own sort of interest in these crimes. And yeah, I mean, I think that Lex in the book is really kind of determined and hopeful that she can live independently of what has taken place, but she is kind of endlessly pulled back by her pseudonym and by her family and by the press. And I kind of wanted to capture that in that kind of line, because, you know, everyone knows Lex as Girl A, but I think the rest of the novel goes into who she is beneath that title and beneath the kind of escape that she's managed to make from the house. I don't necessarily find scenes of kind of violence very affecting or very powerful in a way. I hate the idea of readers kind of having to endure something rather than, you know, as a kind of part of something that I would write. So I actually think there's much more power to be found in leaving spaces between what certain characters know and what they don't know, and what they've experienced and what they're willing to share with the reader in a way. I've always found that when I've been faced with that as a reader, my mind kind of fills in the gaps, and sometimes that can actually be much more powerful, I think.
You said in several interviews that, in your opinion, the book isn't about abuse and darkness, but rather it's about hope and light. Why do you think that is the case?
It's the case to me a lot because of Lex and her character. I think she is such a kind of tough, inspirational woman. And I think that, you know, the sort of driving force of the story is this attempt by her to turn the house of horrors that she's inherited into something positive, to sort of return to the past and try to reframe it as something hopeful. And I think that you can see that in all of her relationships as well. That although the siblings are kind of inevitably scarred in particular ways, they each are kind of trying, I think, in various ways to survive, and you know that they are kind of that there are kind of traces of redemption for each of the brothers and sisters. I think that having Lex as your kind of guide through this world and through what the house and what took place, she, even in the darkest moments, she is somebody who I think is hopeful, and her kind of wit and intelligence, I think, kind of come through, and some humor, I think.
Absolutely.
Too, in the events that she kind of recalls. So I think that sort of lifts the novel from ever feeling like the darkness is sort of overwhelming, because I think you always have Lex to come back to, and she's just such a sort of force of kind of nature, I guess.
Do you think that evil is redeemable, or that even the most evil person has something good in them?
For me, there's very little interest in characters who are entirely good or bad, to be honest. And I'm not sure I would say that's always the case in real life. I'm not sure kind of evil ever, you know, as a rule, there is necessarily kind of some redemption. I think there are some cases where, you know, you potentially think that's kind of gone beyond redemption, but I'd at least like to think that in what led people to where they are, there is something to understand, even if it's not something to sympathize with.
This is maybe a bit of a nitpicking question, but I was fascinated by the fact that the lifeline for Lex and Evie when they're young and they're at home, the lifeline for them is a book of ancient myths, legends. Why choose a book like that to be the lifeline and not something else?
So some of this is definitely just based on the stories that I loved, I think, as a child. So I did have my own book of Greek myths that I kind of returned to again and again. And I think, you know, they are just the most kind of wonderful stories. I guess I think for Lex and Evie, there's also a contrast between those kind of Greek myths and the kind of very flawed gods and goddesses versus the kind of father's very rigid biblical focus, I would say as well. I guess I think, you know, father has a very, very strict interpretation of the Bible, and religion is one of the ways that he kind of controls his family. Whereas I think that in the Greek myths, you see all the sort of subtleties and flaws of the gods.
Could you tell us a bit about your new novel?
Yeah, I can. It's at the editing stage at present, so the first draft is done, which is nice. It is a novel about conspiracy theories. So it tells the story of an attack that takes place at a school. And one character loses a loved one in that attack. And another character many miles away believes that the whole thing was a hoax. And he sets out to disprove that it ever took place. It follows those two characters as they get closer to revenge or redemption.